Our whole point in this is that consumers are inherently unreliable. We do not use the same words to describe the same experience, especially newcomer consumers, which everyone is going after right now. But what is more important to be good at is predicting how much what consumers like something, whether or not they can describe it. One of the reasons Tastry was founded is I kept looking for research and insight on consumer likability. At what threshold do these compounds matter? And there was very little data to be found.
Sit back and grab a glass. It's Wine Talks with Paul K.
Hey, welcome to Wine Talks with Paul K. And we are in studio today, beautiful Southern California, about to have a conversation with Katerina Axelsson of Tastry.com. And she's going to talk about teaching a computer to taste. Hey, give me a review and subscribe to the show. If you have nothing nice to say, don't say it at all, because that's how us egotistical podcasters exist. So thank you for listening to this show, and if you could subscribe, I'd appreciate it. But now while we're here to have a conversation with Katerina Axelsson. She's with Tastry.com, and she has taught a computer to taste. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Paul. Thanks for having me.
This is going to be quite intriguing, just because of our initial conversation. And I had a chance to get on the line with one of your people and understand better what you're talking about. But primarily, you're applying AI, which is a scary acronym to a lot of people, to the wine industry. Is that like, hello, who came up with this idea?
Well, the way I see AI, it's not, we're not just using AI for the sake of AI. We're using it to solve real problems, problems we may not have been able to solve before. So, our objective is to make AI our slave and not the other way around. Otherwise, I wouldn't be using it.
I would take over your job. But it's pretty amazing that what AI does, at least what I've used it for here on the creative side of editing and those kinds of things. I'm looking for ideas, and I'm having difficulty coming up with a 2-word name for a show I want to produce. But other than that, from the wine side, you'd have to kind of think through the idea of where it might apply. And so what brought you to the table to even try to do this?
Yeah, well, it didn't happen intentionally. I wasn't going out or set out to go start a technology company or anything like that. I sort of just stumbled into it because I was working in the wine industry during college. I did all the jobs, Scale House, Crush. I did a lot of work in the lab, and as a young, naive, ambitious person who kind of wanted to be an inventor, I just saw an application for certain problems. And I was looking at the wine industry still as an outsider maybe at that point, but I could still see what was happening behind the scenes. And I just saw a lot of effort was being put into when making a wine, anticipating what the likability, consumer demand was going to be for that wine. How do you solve the unexpected issues that come with an agricultural product? How do you use the words to communicate what you're trying to sell? And, there's a lot of different siloed departments, a big team in the wine industry that does different things. So you have winemakers, you have production, you have sales and marketing, you have the business team, and they would try to communicate how to reach this common goal, which is how do we sell our wine? And sales and marketing would come to winemaking and say things like, tropical was really hot last year. How do we make a wine that's more tropical? And the winemaker would say something like, well, I'm dealing with nature here, so I'll see what happens. So really the inspiration came because I thought, hey, there must be some sort of way to take this mysterious artistic product and as a scientist, objectify it so that we can answer some questions that, we weren't able to answer before.
What were you thinking of doing when you started chemistry at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo? I have a couple years of computer science under my belt. I really wanted to go in and do bioinformatics. You can imagine what we're doing at Tastry I wanted to do for biology and health, but it didn't turn out that way. Since then I've hired more qualified people. So I never really, scientists, I would say. So I never really went down that path. So it's interesting because you said a lot, and I want to break it down and parse it out a little bit. Primarily, particularly when it comes to applying AI to our industry, you have obviously more than one distinct sort of compartment or department in the wine trade, and classically the counter forces of the farmer in the vineyard and the marketeer on the street. These are two completely different groups of people. And you have seemed to bring together through technology, at least bridge the gap. So let's start with the vineyard side of things. Where do you apply Tastry's expertise in this huge data point database, or two databases you have in the vineyard?
Yeah, I can think of a couple of examples off the top of my head. I mean, most of our work happens post-secondary fermentation today, but there are some examples where we had, it was a top 10 winery. I don't know how much I can say about that. And they didn't have enough equipment to pick all of the fruit at the same time. And, when you pick fruit, it's very critical that you get the timing right. So they were trying to make a decision on which parts of the vineyard would be picked at what time frame, right? Based on the chemistry. And they had this, really big consultant come in, and there was a lot of friction because the consultant was advising you pick early on this lot or whatnot, and the winemakers were battling against it because they said, look, you don't understand our terroir. It's you pick this part later. And so they kind of came in to use Tastry as an arbiter of what the truth was. And so we analyzed those samples and backed up the winemaker's intuition, which was, if you pick early, you're going to lose about 25% of your client base because they're no longer going to like the finished product, right? And we did that for, I don't know, a tiny fraction of the cost that it took a consultant to get, the answer that winemakers had already found to be intuitive. So in that case, it was more of how do you use data to back it up so the business team can make the best decision possible.
So I'm trying to keep this so that when somebody watches, listens, we can sort of parse it out and deal with it one piece at a time. So I kind of want to start with, if I remember right from having the conversation with one of your operatives, that you have 1,000,004 data points, or you have two databases of data points. So let's start with the accumulation of that data. Is this what you did when you started this project, was create this concept of all these fields and all this information that we're going to need to use to draw conclusions depending on what cycle of the wine process we're in?
Yes. Yes, there's two data sets that make what we do possible. How it's applied is very broad, as you can imagine. Different size wineries, different parts of the industry want to understand different things. But fundamentally, what they use Tastry for is to anticipate and predict markets of opportunity and consumer demand, and then react to it. So the two data sets are, one, this unique way we gather analytical chemistry and flavor chemistry data in a wine. We trained a machine over many years and millions of dollars to grab all the chemistry through one pass through multiple machines, as opposed to running panels for quality control, which is how chemistry is usually done. And the reason we did that is because machines don't look at chemistry or experience chemistry the way humans do. We experience all the complexities and the chemical soup of that product at once. And so if you look at one compound at a time, you're not getting the context of what is actually going to be expressed on the nose or on the palate, is the most simple, maybe intuitive way to put it. So we found a method that could capture all the analytes and look at the flavor matrix, not just specific compounds. And then the second, and that allows us to have visibility that no one's had before in a cost-effective way. The second part of the invention is, how do we tie all this chemistry to how consumers like these wines? And, we trained our algorithms off our own very professional, very robust double-blind tasting panels where we had the consumers taste the wines of various experience levels for the same wines we had analyzed the chemistry for. So we have a consumer database. We can extrapolate it nationally as if it were one big giant virtual focus group and run simulations to see what will happen to a wine before it's bottled. And then the other one is, the chemistry that makes it happen, I guess.
If I showed you the flavor wheel, what's her name? Noble? Dr. Noble?
Yeah.
She might have been SLO, no? Or Fresno or something? Anyway, if I showed you that wheel, would you take that wheel and say, these are the chemical, would you change the wheel to express the chemical compound that addresses all of those things that we supposedly can try and detect?
Yes, we do pick up the compounds that are associated with the flavors described on the flavor wheel. But just to be a bit bold here, our whole point in this is that consumers are inherently unreliable with this flavor wheel. We do not use the same words to describe the same experience, especially newcomer consumers, which everyone is going after right now. But what is more important to be good at is predicting how much what consumers like something, whether or not they can describe it. And I was just really surprised. Like, one of the reasons Tastry was founded is I kept looking for research and insight on consumer likability. At what threshold do these compounds matter? And there was very, very little data to be found. Everyone was focused on, does benzaldehyde make these consumers describe cherry? And I'm sitting there and I'm like, yeah, but does benzaldehyde make these consumers like this wine?
Introduction in just a moment. Hey, have a listen to Keith Sorlus. I just finished that episode, just launched it last week. And he texted me this morning, and he's a winery up in Los Olivos, family-owned, second generation. And he told me that he watched the show and he cried. And I think you're going to cry too. It's an amazingly emotional show about what we do in this business. Have listened to that, as well as Thomas Schlumberger. He was just released as well. Now, Thomas Schlumberger is a seventh generation Alsatian winemaker. And we got to have dinner together, and we opened a bottle of 1945 Riesling. And when you consider the fact that the Nazis were occupying Alsace at the time that wine was being grown, is absolutely fascinating. Have a listen to that.
So, yes, we can do the flavor wheel, but it's kind of like, I don't know, it's kind of like a bonus. It's not really the main course of what we do.
Well, I think I brought it up because I think it's important, particularly now, and I think it's a fallacy personally, and I'm sort of not on a quest, but it's part of my storytelling, and that is there's this whole movement of changing the language of wine, supposedly, and it makes me laugh because my father used to cringe when I would use fruit expressions, which was part of my growing up in this industry as expressions, and he would have never done that. Michael Broadbent and Harry Waugh and all the famed critics back in the day would have never used those terms, and so if you change it again and you start using contemporary terms like Fruit Loops, Captain Crunch, and Gatorade as descriptors, that again is going to be just as confusing to the consumer as to what you're talking about as it was for my father to hear fruit, impressions from me.
Yeah.
So I guess it kind of proves your point that the standardization of the character or the descriptors really isn't the point here. So I, as a wine club owner for years, 35 years, and there are a lot of newcomers in the industry throughout time. And I used to laugh at this idea of answer a few questions. Do you like mushrooms? Do you salt your food? Do you eat raspberries or blueberries, for them to decide what you're going to get? And so I used to would challenge those websites to see if they're accurate and put in all kinds of different answers. And I got the same recommendations.
Yes. Yeah, I remember those. Yeah, definitely. I think, at least for newcomers, those original recommenders put a bad taste in consumers' mouth. No pun intended.
That was funny, actually. So you're right.
I think, we've come a long way since then, but I think one of the issues with those recommenders is they functioned as a tasting note filter, which kind of just goes back to what we were talking about. And what they would do, they were really simple. They would look at, a sommelier's tasting notes for a wine. And if you said you didn't like something, it would remove the wines from the recommendations that have those tasting notes. The issue with that is context isn't there. You have to look at everything else that is in there. And it's not a one-to-one relationship is what I'm trying to say. So for example, I could very much love a wine that has pyrazines in it if I hate bell peppers. And it's not because of the presence or absence of pyrazine. It's because of the hundreds of other compounds interacting with pyrazine that make it acceptable or not acceptable to me. So it was just not that kind of filter. It was not granular enough for our palates to provide any kind of efficacy. But it was fun to take. It was a fun quiz to take. So, yeah, I agree with you, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Well, it's interesting because, you go back to Madame Clicquot, and in fact, the movie just came out by the book by Tilar Mazio, who's been on the show. And, Madame Clicquot is a brilliant businesswoman, and she was, she had a cuvée for the Russian market, which is sweeter than the cuvée for the English market. So she had no data points to work with except for what people said. But can I ask you a question? Have you become an enophile? Have you become a wine geek through all this process?
Yes. Yeah. I do enjoy a glass of Burgundy with my duck fat fries. I certainly didn't start out that way. But that's where I ended up. Yes.
Oh, you said a mouthful there, because besides the duck fat fries is that, all enophiles land in Burgundy for the complexity and the understanding of the terroir. But the reason I said that sort of tongue in cheek was like already, the aristocracy of wine has embedded itself in generations for generations. And so, and people like you and I can study as long as we want and learn as much as we want because we think it's really interesting, but most people don't really care. And so, and I've been with many guests of my friends who say, I think what you talk about is a bunch of BS because I can't taste apples in this Chardonnay or anything like that. But here now you're sitting at dinner with somebody and you have a glass of Burgundy and you say, gee, I taste pyrazines. That's got to be confusing for somebody. I'm joking, of course. But how do you reconcile some of that? How do you sort of sit and have a glass of wine with some friends and not move your brain into that area now that you've studied this in such a granular fashion?
I think my friends get a little bit more overwhelmed by me talking about the algorithms and the technology that goes behind the chemistry, and me constantly saying what I'm experiencing is irrelevant to what you're experiencing, and kind of doing that brain inception, whatever you call it, exercise. But I think this goes back to my earlier point, which is I didn't start out drinking Burgundy. It really eased into it. And I think, you mentioned the wine aristocracy, and there are people who are very, very excited about the complexities, the terroirs, the uniqueness of wine. Wine has a lot of advantages that way that other alcoholic beverage categories do not, but we kind of freak out consumers who are not there yet. We come on too strong, and we come on too intimidating. And so I feel like a lot of consumers get turned away just because it's too much too soon. And what we really want to do, if we really want them to get excited about all the uniqueness of all the wines of the world, we got to sneak into education. We can't just throw it at them with all this lingo and jargon. We got to give them a little fun fact here or there and just let them enjoy their wine with their dinner. Then we got to do a little bit more. Then we got to do a little bit more. We almost have to trick them into it, which means become more approachable is what I would say to the wine industry. Like the echo chamber, where we have this elitist attitude is not attracting consumers who could eventually be the kind of consumer you want to talk to.
It's interesting. I just drew a graph while we're talking. So the old Ben Franklin the sales closing tool, which would be on the left side, all the reasons why you would would use my product, and on the right side, all the reasons why I use my competitors. Of course, when you're done with the customer, you've overbuilt your side and have very few on the customer side. But on the same side, as the same story here, wine has always been consumer driven. It's like I mentioned about Madame Clicquot. She had two different markets to work with, and there are organizations in the world that deal with consumerism of wine and how to support big brands and small brands into developing that. And that's really what Tastry is for. It's to help get a granular analytic viewpoint of not only what's going on with the wine, but matching that with potential markets of a consumer and doing that with these millions of data points and an AI taking over. But at the same time, we need to tell stories. And I think that's the doling out of information that you're talking about here, where you don't just barrage somebody with all this information, but the human interest of wine has to come from potentially the story. So are you marrying these two sort of ideas together at Tastry?
Yes, I think the marriage of the two ideas is necessary. So I would say the story is what gets you to buy the wine the first time, but what's in the bottle gets you to buy it repeatedly. So you need both. You need a mechanism or means by which someone is interested enough to buy the wine, but if they don't like it, then they're not going to come back. So what's in the bottle does matter.
So what typically happens to a client? I noticed that Cameron Hughes was one of your customers, and which is a great story. And I'm friends with Jessica Kogan, his ex-wife, and then of course they sold the Vineyard Wine Estates, and now that went bankrupt. So I'm not sure where Cameron Hughes landed. I think at one of the buyers, but whatever, not important. Brilliant story about direct-to-consumer winemaking, buying odd lots, putting them in a bottle under one brand. The whole timely, actually for him, a very timely approach to the wine market. But what did he come to you for? What would anybody come to you for? What would be the first question? Can you help me?
Well, it's funny. I had tried to reach out to him a couple of times, and I was sharing our grand claims of what our capabilities are, and he was kind of like, "Okay, I don't know if I'm interested. I don't know what this is all about." But I finally actually ended up getting a meeting with him, because the opportunity with Cameron is he's dealing with so many lots from so many different places with and he's selling it to consumers who care about quality over price and that sort of thing. And he's a titan in the industry in a way. So I at the very least, I wanted his perspective. And when I showed him what we actually do, right on the spot, he ended up becoming like one of our largest or most loyal customers. And he tested us and gave us some really bad batches of wine. And he said, "Tell me what your Compi blend can do to ameliorate this." And so we came back with the recipe, and it became a really, really nice wine. So he was a believer ever since. So we have a lot of business initiatives. Maybe you should have him on the podcast to talk about all of those.
Yeah, right.
I guess I would say seeing is believing, and it means a lot to us that someone so prolific in the industry is a supporter.
So that was on the manufacturing side. So that's like saying, look, we got to fix this problem, or what is my problem? I suppose is another question that's asked. Like if I bring you a sample of one of my wines, do you also, I might say, what's the problem with this? Besides
the problem with this,
why? Like, could you do, if I came with a wine going like, I can't figure out what I did here.
Mm-hmm.
What's my problem? And then obviously now you've ascertained for him how to fix it. But
exactly.
Do they ask the question, what is the problem? Like,
yes, sometimes they don't have to ask. We can see it. It's unique depending on what's going on with the wine, but we've saved entire productions from smoke taint by figuring out what the recipe would be for ameliorating the damage before the fruit was dropped. Lots and lots of productions were saved that way. There's other things too that we help winemakers solve problems faster than they would otherwise. For example, we analyzed this really interesting Italian grape variety. I'm trying to protect the confidentiality of my customers.
No pro.
And they had put so much oak in that wine because that was the Italian way of doing things that it was an outlier in our massive database. And we really basically said, look, we can see if there were, a fraction of this amount of oak in the wine, not only would you save hundreds of thousands of dollars in making this wine, but your likability will go up by 60%. So maybe you should take some of that makeup off and let the natural characteristics of the fruit shine through. And they didn't. They kind of already had an idea something was wrong, but this just gave them the exact direction on how to fix it and save money. So there's examples like that.
I just thought of something that was really interesting because the wine market in Armenia, which I've sort of, tied to a little bit. I'm of Armenian descent, and I've interviewed many of the winemakers, and my interest in actually the wine industry in Armenia came from the war in Artsakh and all the wineries that were stolen, and that opened a whole Pandora's box to studying war and wine. But there's a grape there called Adeni, and Adeni is sort of the indigenous Armenian grape. There's like 400 or 500 indigenous grapes there, but it seems to go back so far that there's hardly any DNA data to support any of it. It's like one of the empty charts. And I had this contention, not chemically and not certainly from any analysis that Tastry has done, that it doesn't like oak. It doesn't do well with oak. It needs to be expressed without it.
Yeah.
And I get pushback from that from a lot of people because, you're supposed to oak wine. It's a red wine, supposed to oak it, and everybody in the world oaks their wine. And the French have been doing it for 100,000 years. Can you help decide that?
Yes. Yeah, we've done it many times.
Really, it's so interesting because there's another grape called Sireni from the same area, from Artsakh, that does really well with oak. But when I ask you, does this wine do well with oak? What's the premise of that? That the likability of it, or the character of it, or the fact that it's out of balance, or whatever?
Yeah, it's about balance with all the other, the polyphenols, the aldehydes, all the alcohols, everything else that's happening in the chemistry of the wine. What's the correct balance is definitely one of it. How much oak, what consumers will perceive is another one. What aspects of the oak will be perceived. It's pretty robust. I mean, you could break it down every which way. And then also how much oak is the optimal amount of oak for what the winemaker is intending to accomplish.
Is this system of yours constantly learning? Obviously it's AI, but are you cautious about introducing certain data to it that's not sort of vetted in the first place? In other words, you're not sure what you're going to present it, and so you sort of have a sandbox to work with to understand.
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons that, we have these two internal proprietary data sets, it's not just like a marketing thing. It's not just something we say, right, to come across as a cool AI company. It's because the quality of the data matters. You don't want to output garbage. And that's going to happen if you're inputting garbage. And the reason we had to spend so much time acquiring our own data sets is because the visibility of traditional chemistry methods was not enough. Wine is too complex for that as it relates to humans, right? And the other one was predicting consumer likability off crowdsourced scores isn't enough. And that's everything else that was out in there. So I couldn't acquire that data. So one example I'll give is like, there's the average wine in Vivino is like a 3.6 or something like that. Don't quote me on that, right? 3.6 stars. But like, if you look at the data, it's kind of like a bell curve, and it's like, it's 50% of people rated this a 3, and then, 20% of people rated it a 5, and another 20% rated it a 1. So you kind of have this reversion to the mean problem where I can't teach my AI to say this is a 3.6 wine because it depends on who you ask. Like, that's kind of the point. So quality of data matters. Yeah.
Little known to a lot of people, I found a software company in 1984, which was database driven. And, obviously back then the nomenclature was garbage in, garbage out. And so you have to be very careful. I think most marketeers would learn that now with email addresses becoming stale so fast and using them and costing you money because they're bad. It's bad garbage. But it's funny you use Vivino. I was writing Vivino when you said Vivino. I don't use Yelp when I go looking for a restaurant because I have no idea what the person who's rating it has experienced in their life. I do use the Michelin Guide, and they have a recommended thing, but at least there's a standard, standardization of who's tasting the food, and so they can. It's a real comparison. It's kind of like what I was doing at Wine of the Month Club. I stood there by myself for 35 years every Tuesday tasting wine, and so the benchmark was me. So at least I know if I'm comparing a Sonoma Cabernet to another Sonoma Cabernet, I have this vast database of information to work from. Maybe it was altered by the time of day I was tasting. Maybe it was altered by the fact I had a sweet tart before I started tasting. But, at least there was a standardization. So how do you, when you look at the Vivinos and the wine searches and those consumer rated things, do you look at them as completely skeptical?
It's not, I wouldn't say skeptical.
Tongue in cheek, maybe?
I was just saying not granular enough to suit the purposes that we're looking to suit. Yeah, it's just not granular enough.
Well, I don't see, I have this other, maybe this is another avenue, but when people ask about scores in general in wine trade seem to have sort of not subsided, but they've been a little less important. I mean, when you walk into a wine shop or a supermarket, you see shelf talkers on every bottle. It's kind of confusing regardless. But certainly if you have a Canary Island Liston Negra that's the 95 points, you're not going to get the same experience you would for a 95-point Napa Cabernet. So, the point system, if people that just buy points are going to be disappointed in some of these purchases rather than sort of this breakdown of what the profile is. So you've come to Cameron Hughes, you've come to all these companies, and you've created some interesting data points for them. Once they get this back, how does it affect one to get on the street? How does Tastry use that data to help them understand what we all look for is how to sell this stuff?
How to sell this stuff? Yeah. Well, we have this back end piece where you can see what's really going on in production, right? What are the benefits? What are the challenges? What can you do about it? How do you differentiate your wine? How do you compare to us? Like all the practical things you would need to see in winemaking, you see on the back end. When we're talking about sales and marketing, it's all about what is the best possible opportunity for this wine and how do I communicate that so that a buyer takes a chance on this wine if they may not have otherwise? So it's showing the best aspects of the wine, right? Not like here's the real deal. Like this is the best cab in the $20 range for consumers in Texas, for example, or whatever it may be. So it's a score. Except the average, it's a 200-point score at Tastry, and 100 means the wine is average in its category. And the difference between this scoring system and, the traditional scoring system is that we have context here. So it's not, is this a good wine according to this expert's opinion? It's, is this wine competitive in the context that you're trying to sell it in? That's what the score is based off of. So we have broad, popular, non-distinctive wines that score very highly in our system, like nationally distributed, household name, non-sophisticated $10 wines. They score very highly. We also have very, very high-end chateau type, unique wines that score very highly, but they score very highly for different reasons. One scores highly because it's very distinctive and unique and has a unique chemistry and it suits the sophisticated palate. Another one scores highly because it has mass market appeal. So that's how we work. I hope that helps.
No, that's interesting. One of the questions was going to be if you're working with a chateau whose primary objective in their wine is to reflect the time and place and to reflect a place and a time is radically different than the consumer I saw the other day at the market who was desperately seeking a wine on the shelf that was different than she always tasted, which was Rodney Strong's. And I was just talking with her briefly, and I said, what do you like to drink? She said, I drink Rodney Strong, but I want something else. Now, here's something interesting, because this is what you do, a data-driven way of doing it, which I told her. I said, well, here's one. And I think she knew that I've been in the wine trade for a long time. I forgot how I remember her, but she did not take my suggestion. Mm-hmm. She walked away completely. And I don't know if she came back, embarrassed or not embarrassed to do it, but it seems like, the winery needs to get out their position in the world of doing this. Is that what they do with this data? Is like, well, we are sort of in the Josh world, or we're in the Apothic Red world, or we're in the, the Pinot, the Wayfarer Pinot Noir world. They take this data and they use it to support their marketing efforts, to see who they're going to go visit first. How's it work?
They use it to identify how to go after consumers who are going to like their wine, even if it's a completely different wine style from what the consumer's used to. Consumers like a variety of different wine styles. So I'm trying to find out the best way to explain it. So one of the problems right now with the industry, one of the reasons it's hard to differentiate and do what you're describing is it's actually the humans' problem. AI did not do this. The industry, at least on the national retail scale, has a copycat syndrome issue where the buyers or the retailers are telling wineries, hey, I want you to make me a Rodney Strong lookalike, right? And then whenever a brand has velocity or takes off, you have everyone else trying to copycat it. So what's starting to happen is I describe it as Instagram face. A lot of the wines on the shelf are starting to taste the same, and it gets kind of boring, right? That AI did not do that. Humans have been doing that just fine on their own for decades. And it's really unfortunate because we've had to fight a really hard fight to steer both wineries and retailers away from this behavior by showing them, why are you, a 50,000 case winery, trying to copy Meiomi when you can make a more distinctive wine that is going to outcompete Meiomi with the fruit you have, and you're going to have more success doing it? Lean into the unique characteristics of your wine. I promise you, I reassure you, consumers are going to like it. Consumers are buying Meiomi because of the brand. They're going to like your wine and be more loyal to it if you lean into making your own wine. And
wow, is that a tough sell?
Well, it used to be, but I think over time, we've established trust and credibility, and we've had a couple of cycles in the industry, and people have seen the benefits from a business perspective on the outcomes after Tastry's recommendations, and it's not as hard as it used to be. But there is this syndrome that, if you're going to talk about tackling the entire supply chain to stop doing this and give consumers something more interesting, it's going to take time.
What an interesting conversation, because, I guess we tend to want to do that. We've made wine here, and I've made a wine that cost me $22 to make, starting with the grapes from Mendocino, and which would tell you've got to put it on the street for $35. But I know I can't compete with $35 other brands that are well known because I put up, no one's going to buy it,
right?
And so I end up selling it for less than it cost me to make it in order to get it out of here. And so it would seem like a risk on my part as the winemaker or the winery owner to listen to Katerina and say, yeah, I'm going to try something completely different, and based on her data, I should be able to sell this, but I'm not sure. When I know that if I think I put something out that tastes like Josh, that maybe somebody might buy it again. Is that the tough sell that you're into? I mean, that's the...
Well, I would say not as tough, because when we present it, we show consumers in terms of circles, right? So the bigger the circle, the more consumers like it, but it doesn't mean it's the most likable wine. So bigger is not always better. And we can show your wine and show how your circle, your wine's consumers overlap with the wine you're competing against or fixated on or trying to emulate or whatever it is. And if there's a strong overlap, we can say, look, we can keep this overlap and have the same consumers that like this popular brand like your wine, but the wine can taste completely different, and the same consumers are going to like it. So if you want to target your marketing and for market share after this brand, let me show you how you can do that without trying to be a copycat. Like, there's a better way. And that usually provides, I don't want to say it's like a bridge or a compromise, but it provides some level of reassurance that there is a market for your wine, if that makes sense.
It would seem then you deal with primarily, and maybe more differentiation than two groups of people. You have small wineries that have no budget, that are farmers that don't understand anything about marketing wine, and you have corporate conglomerates that have the access and the ability to risk capital to put a brand on the street and give it enough attention to get traction out of it.
Yes. Yes, they use it differently. I mean, small wineries, we just work with them to solve emergencies sometimes, but most of the time, they don't really need a lot of help becoming more distinctive or unique. We don't really need to touch the wine. Really, it's about finding that needle in the haystack and figuring out where are the consumers that are going to like my wine, or what are the consumers that are going to like my wine already drinking, and how do I find them? So it's more acting as a matchmaker in a sense.
You sometimes just go, look, I can't help you because you're not listening. Like you would have. You're not going to throw anybody under the bus. Nobody knows what I'm talking about.
Yes.
Look, farmers are farmers, and they're egotistical, and brand owners are egotistical. And let's face it, we have our objectives, and they come to you and you say, wait a minute, this is a little whack what you're doing. Why don't we try this? And they're like, no, it's not.
That's true. It's also very insular industry, and people are also very secretive about what they do and how they do it. And we've had to navigate that, but I think it's very difficult to ignore, when you see something working, and when, especially in a time like this, when the industry is trying to react to the changing landscape, I think people are a bit more interested in or capable of doing something they haven't done before. So the times of upheaval are usually a good time to try something new as well.
Do you think then, I mean, with your data sets and your first to market with this idea, and of course, the accumulation of all the data, and now all the scenarios you've tried to solve or you've looked at, that there'll be more people trying to data drive the wine trade?
I hope so. I mean, I think it's a massive undertaking, and I hope that there will be an inspiration to bring more technology into the industry because of this. I mean, I know companies in other industries and the consumer packaged goods categories that are trying to do something similar, and they're like ripping off language from our website, So it seems like it is still there's still a lot of work to be done. To fully integrate into flavor and sensory-based industries. And I think one of the reasons for that is consumer perception and experience is very personal and unique, and you have to be a bit of a sophisticated technology company to crack that. So yeah, it's going to take time, but I don't think we're the only ones that should be tackling this.
There's a woman on the show, she bought the aroma wheel, was given to her by the creator. Her name was Isabelle Lechev, and she teaches tasting classes. And she was a chemist. I believe she was a chemist, and she worked for the large beverage companies. I think it was Coca-Cola, on formulation. And she teaches these online classes. I wondered if you'd heard of her, if you've talked to her about it, because it's sort of it's not data driven. Well, it might be though. She takes the wheel, and maybe she's moved into more chemistry. Anyway, just the thought that I was thinking about. Do you think then, and we're almost out of time, oddly, that the future of the wine trade is going to be almost entirely dependent upon this going forward, or is there still a chance for the dreamer and the romanticist to go into Napa and buy $1 million worth of land and get 15 square feet for that $1 million, and then develop a brand around what they think it should be?
Yeah, I've actually had this conversation on topics like this outside of the wine industry. So I think on a mass scale, right, for the industry, I don't think there's going to be a choice, right? You have to adapt and use technology, right? It's kind of like 20 years ago, people were laughing, saying, I don't need a cell phone. I don't need a cell phone. Why do I have to carry this heavy brick in my pocket? There's no point. Or if you walked into an office building in New York City 40 years ago and they said you need a computer to do your job, people would laugh at you, right? Now it's pretty much ubiquitous. That is, technology is making things better and it's solving a lot of problems and making things more efficient, and it is inevitable. Some industries might take longer than others, but it's going to happen and you're going to have to adapt. This is not just for wine, this is basically for everything as time goes on, as humans in a, advanced civilization or whatever you want to call it. At the same time, there's also going to be a luxury product component and human. And by the way, I'm not trying to say we're just a tool for humans to make wine, but I'm just saying, like, a Bentley is a handcrafted car, right? For example, where the car maker signs every part, the person responsible for that part signs every part to make that car, right? There's handmade watches. There are luxury products that are always going to have that artisan handcrafted appeal to it. And they're going to appeal to a small percentage of the population who are enthusiasts. And that will be done a little bit differently. So I think that there's going to be a luxurious demand for human-made products in various industries. But like I said, our AI doesn't focus on just making wine. We focus on exposing it. So depending on what you're trying to accomplish, there's a tool for it. But overall, that's where I think things are headed. So not trying to mischaracterize things, but that's my
No,
vision.
but I think it's an important piece.
Yeah.
I need to get a book. I want to ask you a question real fast, but the reason being, the concept always has been if you're not using some of the latest tools than your competitors are, and so that's going to give them advantage. And I can't imagine any businessman today, though there's probably most, that don't have GPT on their phones open to just figure something out. I have a niece who started a salad dressing company, and she's just in the throes of trying to brand it. You'll get it branded, and she says, I have it open, all the time because there's a lot of things I don't know what to do, and I ask it questions, and and that's just the simplest form of AI. And here's a very granular, sophisticated form. But I want to ask you a question. This is kind of fun. This is sort of tongue in cheek. We're going to wrap this up. We're at 47 minutes. This is a book. It's called Wine is the Best Medicine, written by Dr. E. Murray. This is from the 70s.
Wow.
It's a list of maladies, human maladies. And it's kind of like this question. And by the way, I give you three choices. And so far, the running percentage of people getting it right is exactly 33%. So usually it's a guess. But there's a bunch of allergies or anemia or bronchitis or diarrhea, fever, gout. These are all maladies that he has a recommended wine to cure, or at least to minimize the symptoms, and a dosage. And so this question is more like the Master of Wine test, where you would be asked the question, but we want to know why you chose that answer. So
Okay.
Wrong or right, it doesn't matter. It's like, tell me what you thought the answer, why it was the answer.
Okay, let's see what happens.
Yeah, and these are all French wines, by the way. So let's pick, so nervous depression. If we, a contemporary subject at worst, right? Nervous depression. We're not going to take Xanax or Ativan. We're going to have a wine to solve this problem.
Why not?
Yeah, exactly. Like I had a PhD on the show, and she says, "Well, regardless of the answer, you're going to feel better anyway. So what the heck?" You could have a dry champagne, a Medoc Red, or a Cote de Beaune to help your nervous depression, and why? And then we have a dosage issue we got to deal with.
Dosage. Okay. Okay. I'm a little nervous.
No, don't be nervous. There's no, like I said, that like no one's really got the questions right because you're not the doctor who wrote the book, so you're gonna know.
Okay. So you want me to pick one of the three?
Yes, one of the three: the Medoc, dry champagne, or Beaune.
Okay. I'm trying to figure out, does the Medoc or the Beaune have the highest resveratrol content? Because I know that resveratrol shuts down certain depression-causing enzymes in the brain, and I'm forgetting their name right now. But the one with the highest amount of resveratrol, whichever of the two reds it is, personally, I would choose bubbles because that's what people call me when I drink sparkling wine, and I'm very bubbly.
Oh, you changed personality. Yeah, yeah. You didn't become a scientist anymore?
Exactly. I get very bubbly. So bubbles to be bubbly sounds intuitively right, but I know the resveratrol would have actual effects on the brain that are beneficial for happiness.
I mean, though you were nervous about this, you're the most granular in your objective and in your description of why you chose the wines, though it was wrong. But despite that, it's very funny because I taught my son-in-laws about proper champagne, and now it's costing me a fortune. It's not. But the answer was the Medoc, and I suppose from the resveratrol point of view, it would have more because of the skin content and the color of it. But and the reason here, according to Dr. Murray, is the glycerin contains for the intestine with the phosphates of the fermented grape juice to form glycerol phosphates of natural lime, which have tonic virtues and which do not interfere with the functional integrity of the nervous system. Whatever. Now,
I need this book.
It's great. It's called, I've got, this is my father's, but I did find it online. And then there's also videos of the guy online, Dr. Murray.
I really need, I'd like this in my collection. This is very interesting.
It is on eBay. I found it on eBay, but the one I bought on eBay was in French, but I can read French. It's okay. But there's a dosage. This is probably the most important part. What do you think the dose is?
I would say a full glass, but the definition of full glass can vary.
Well, it says 2 glasses before and during meals, so that would probably get you to a bottle a day, which can't be bad, right?
You need a really big glass.
It's been a great honor and pleasure to have you on the show and not only understand the science of this, but the entrepreneurial spirit to do it, because that's really what drives dreamers and visionaries like you. So I really appreciate your time today. And I think we're going to have another conversation in the future as things unwind and this industry changes again, is bound to change again, and understand what's going on.
That would be so great. I look forward to coming back.
Thank you again for your time. Cheers.